Welcome to the Government Affairs Update for February 19th, 2021, which is a success already in its own right because every week I forget what day or day of the month Friday falls on. So I'm always a day early. So I actually got this one right without an edit. So congratulations. We're already off to a good start. I'm joined by Katharine Mottley, our tax guru, Matt Reiffer, who is our infrastructure guru on the advocacy team. This is a kind of an off week. It's quiet in Washington right now. Each of the chambers are off on their district work period this week, the President's Day district work period. Not a recess, just a district work period. Everybody likes to call it a recess, but people do get work done during the times when they're not in Washington. So that means it's quiet up on the Hill. The last time that we had a conversation at the update, the House and the Senate were still working through the reconciliation process on the budget. That is still the case today. Negotiations are ongoing, but it does look like all indications are that they are going to use the reconciliation process on the COVID bill, and then hopefully we'll return to regular order on the second part, which is economic stimulus, which is probably one of our best opportunities for infrastructure. But something else we want to kind of talk about today, and that's something that we're doing in conjunction with our business resources and education team, which is a first of its kind online course that's going to kick off on March 2nd. It's titled Effective Government Engagement at the Local, State, and Federal Levels. And what this is going to be is a 5-week course that really looks at each level of government and focuses in on what you need to know to be effective in advocacy, especially now. And who better to talk about that than two of our all-star lobbyists in advocacy, because this is what they do every day. You know, this course is going to be great because it's that combination of people who work in the field and are actual practitioners in government affairs. Also covers something near and dear to my heart, which is communications. And it goes everywhere from zoning boards at the local level all the way up to meeting with your members of Congress. A true kind of round the world advocacy course. So, just opening it up to our team here, I guess, the first question I'll go to Katharine. How important is it to have kind of a structured course that helps our members learn the tools for effective advocacy?
Thanks, Jeff. And I think the word you just used there is an important one, which is tools. The other word I was thinking of was skills.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a course about developing policy.
Yeah.
That is what Matt and Steve and Dan and Lynn and I are all here for. And that's one way in which we can really serve our members. But there are moments when it makes an enormous difference to have not just sort of advocacy professionals like us, but also to have constituents talking to their members of Congress and their staff, helping them understand what engineering firms do, how engineering firms contribute to the community, how they help build the infrastructure that runs the economy and our lives. And so, this is, I think this course is going to be really helpful to members, help equipping them with those skills so that they can feel more comfortable in those interactions that make such a difference in the work that we do.
Yeah, I mean, Matt, you in your experience in the Hill, I mean, I think we all have our own kind of takeaways, but how effective it was to have constituents meet with their member. I mean, that was always the best way of getting onto the members who I work for, getting onto their calendars, is if a group came in with a group of constituents. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Jeff. Certainly, members of Congress and staff build relationships with interest groups and stakeholders and lobbyists and so forth. But far and away, the most effective advocacy comes from constituent individuals and businesses, because those are the folks that they represent. They're in Washington working on their behalf, and so they want to know how legislation and policy and regulations are affecting them, and if things need to change, to make life better for their own constituents and the economy that they represent.
Yeah.
No, I agree completely. There is nothing like having someone from back home, as the members of Congress will say, is having someone from back home who can talk about something in the district, how it works, how it's affecting them. Another key area where our members certainly can engage is that members of Congress are always interested in jobs. They're always interested in, jobs in the district. How do policies affect employment and employers? And our members can bring that perspective as well. So I think that that's another important key.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you can have the best lobbyist who's really skilled on policy and understands it just as well, if not better, than the staff of the members. And they can, they can cite regulations chapter and verse. But it's always the groups that come in with a lobbyist and constituents or people who are engaged in the industry that they're talking about. They will always have that edge, right? And they'll always have that ability to be more persuasive because, like you said, members care, of course, about jobs. They care about how does this translate to my district and why should I care about this issue? Especially when, if you're looking at a committee in the House, especially because they're so large. I mean, members serve on multiple committees. They might have a real interest in transportation and infrastructure, but maybe their heart is set in the fact that they're also on, I don't know, budget committee, or maybe they're also on, HASC, Armed Services Committee. So they're aware of the issues, but they're not, this is not what they spend every day on. And having that ability to have that real life, this is what it means back home, really helps you get your point across.
Well, I agree. And when you were talking, I was also thinking there's something that our members have a lot of, and that's credibility, right? Their education, their expertise, the work that they do on an issue that has bipartisan support and relevance is really essential in terms of the work that Congress does. I think where this course can also be really helpful is helping our members whose expertise is in engineering have a better understanding of how Congress works, and how staff spend their time. And it's, how to bring that expertise to a member of Congress and their staff in a way that's going to be relevant and also stay with them, help them to build that relationship, help them to connect with staff in ways that are really useful, so that when the staff then is at some point in the future looking for someone to provide expertise in these areas, they're going to think of that engineering firm and not another constituent. These are the kinds of things that I think this course is going to be really helpful in building those skills and sharing that kind of information with our members.
Right, I agree. And the other asset will be that this is proactive rather than reactive. We're equipping these members so that they have the tools they need and the resources they need to be effective advocates before a problem comes along and they need to, identify who they need to talk to, or, before a zoning board or some local municipality makes a decision on some project that adversely affects them, and they're scrambling to know what to do. They'll know what to do because they went through this course. They'll know, how to make those connections, or they'll have made those connections already with the representatives or with local officials. So they're ready and prepared for better outcomes.
Yeah, one thing when we talk to a lot of the EEA winners in the infrastructure space during our red carpet interviews and just discussions with them before we put on the virtual event this past December, was that a lot of the successful projects, especially the ones that have very tight timetables, they were very successful because the firms were able to work well with the stakeholders that had to really make the project a success. That's your local councils, it's your commissioners, it's your zoning board, the people at the ground level, because they're the ones who are going to hear from their constituents, which are the people directly affected by that road or that bridge, whatever you're designing and putting into place. And learning the tools to talk to those stakeholders and to develop those relations proactively generally helps make a project work more effectively from top to bottom. So the tools that you can kind of gather through this course, hopefully will translate some of that. Because I think the point that you raise is exactly on point. That it's not a question of being reactive; it's a question of being proactive and developing those relationships now, because you never know when you might need them down the road, and maintaining those relationships.
Absolutely. I mean, that is, as we know in Washington, that is one of the most important assets you can have is a strong relationship. I mean, certainly it's better if you can avoid a crisis altogether, but there will be unexpected moments, and that's not the time when you're going to be able to connect with your local your state legislator or your city council person.
Yeah.
But if you already know them, if you've already developed that relationship, then you're going to be able to act in the moment when it matters.
Yeah. I mean, you have not using any names or organizations, but I mean, do you remember back to your time as a staffer to, an example of a meeting that was just haywire from the start? I mean, does anything stick in your mind for like, this is exactly what you shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, the things that stand out to me when I was meeting with folks that came into the office, or my boss was doing that, was the least effective meetings were the ones where folks just came in and read from a piece of paper that their trade association had given to them, because they felt like they needed to sort of use wonky lobbyist language or technical verbiage or whatever. The best meetings, the most effective meetings, were the ones where they were just casually talking about their business, what they're working on, what's going on locally, projects, employment levels, the economy, those sorts of things, just from a sort of business standpoint or community standpoint. And then you translate that at a high level to, whatever the issue of the day is, or the legislation or the policy that you care about. But you leave that for the paper, and you leave that, for follow-on. It's really those, as Katharine was saying, those relationships, and the familiarity with the business and the business climate, that's really the most effective, in terms of that outreach to the congressman and his staff.
Yeah. All right, Katharine, do you have one that kind of sticks in your mind?
When you were asking that question, I just remembered a fairly awkward meeting that was just me and the constituents. The congressman wasn't there, but where there was a piece of legislation that they opposed, and they hadn't done their homework in advance. And so while we were sitting there talking about it and asking that the congressman not support this, they were reading through the list of co-sponsors, and there was his name. And so there are moments like that where that conversation could have been different. We could have had a really effective conversation about, this is why we don't support this legislation. And we hope that even though the congressman supports it, maybe we can continue to work on it, that kind of thing. But there are, lots of things you can sort of think about heading into a meeting. And then, as you and Matt have said, how do you, what kind of follow-up do you do? How do you kind of make that into a relationship and not just a once a year kind of moment?
Yeah, and that's the thing also, it's you don't always have to go with an ask, right? You can oppose or you can support legislation. That's great. But to Matt's point also, just having that conversation person to person about, this is what's happening, this is what I'm working on. Hey, it would be really cool if you could take a look at this project that I'm working on. I think you would really like to see it, because members, especially when in weeks like this, when they're at home, they don't generally want to, at least in my experience with the members that I work with, they don't want to be in the office. They would rather not be in their district office. They want to be out. They're traveling around. They're booking visits, site tours, usually when the pandemic's not happening, and they're getting around to places. And it's that perfect time to invite your member of Congress to your office. Have you ever seen an engineering firm? Do you ever see what we do? Here's a project that's interesting that you might want to take a look at. Have you seen this technology? All those things deepen, whether it's a commissioner, whether it's a council member, a member of Congress, or a state legislator. It's better for them to get that hands-on experience than a once a year fly-in visit where it's like, oh, here we are again. The engineers are in town, and here's our one piece of paper. So Matt, I know that you're kind of heading up the second session of the course, which is the regulatory process, which is kind of maze-like in its own right, right? You know, there's no easy entry into understanding the regulatory process. What do you hope to convey in that session?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jeff. And yeah, it's a little different from building relationships with elected lawmakers, where you're dealing with regulatory bodies who may or may not, have appointees. I mean, those relationships are important, but the focal point of that course is going to be on navigating the federal regulatory process. So understanding the terminology, just sort of a 101 type introduction to how federal agencies make policy, how they undertake, regulatory actions, the rulemaking process. And then we'll do a deeper dive on some of the more high profile agencies where we expect there would be a more direct interaction between what the agencies are doing and how it would impact our members and their projects. So it'll be project based, but also policy as well. And just giving them the tools, equipping them with the resources they need, so that when the time comes, they will know how to navigate and have an impact through the regulatory process.
Yeah, that's an important thing to get a handle over, because it's just not the legislative process, but the regulatory process is just as important, if not sometimes more so important, than getting bills passed through, either chamber of Congress or even at the state level.
Right. Typically, yeah, legislation provides a lot of latitude to the EPA or the Corps of Engineers, you name it, and the way they implement that and define those parameters and is going to have a really big impact on the work that our firms are doing.
Absolutely. Now, Katharine, which of the courses are you kind of focus in on?
I'm focusing on the federal legislative affairs course, along with our colleague Dan Hilton. And so we have, we're doing a video that goes along with it. And then we're hosting a panel discussion with three people who, as a group, we all know, who used to work on the Hill and now work in the private sector. And they're going to just bring some really interesting experiences to bear. And we're going to talk about, kind of what works, maybe some cautionary tales a little bit, and then also focusing on something, Jeff, that you mentioned a minute ago, which is how valuable it can be to do visits in the district, visits at home, whether that's at a project site or in the office. As you said, show a member of Congress and their staff a cool piece of technology and they will be fascinated. That's always a lot of fun. And, members of Congress and staff really like to get out of the office when we're done with the pandemic, understanding this is hard to do now. But in normal times, they really enjoy getting out of the office. And, so we're going to talk about that and how that can work and how valuable that can be in building these relationships.
I think we've all been in that position where you're having a meeting. I remember clearly with former Chairman Schuster sitting around saying, who we get to be a witness? Oh yeah, remember when we went to this place? Who's that guy? Yeah, him. Get him, because it's that tangible. I have a mental image of being physically there at a place and seeing something, and I need that person to be my witness. And that a lot of times, you could have a ton of expertise available to you, but if you can stick out to the member, your chance of being successful is just going to go up significantly.
Yeah, Jeff, that's a great point too. I mean, I think it's hard to really process for someone who doesn't work on the Hill how many people members of Congress and their staff meet with every year, like how many different groups, different organizations, different topics. And so standing out among those, hundreds, if not thousands of meetings, doing a lot of that stuff back home can really make a difference there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know our colleague Dave Bender is going to be looking at the state and local areas of the course. And of course, his experience at the state level in Illinois is going to pay off there. And then session 5 is communications tools. And I'm working with a colleague, a former colleague from the Hill and also the administration, who was a communicator at, actually ran communications at the Small Business Administration in the previous administration, and was Deputy Communications Director on TNI and with Conference, House Republican Conference for a while, to talk about, how do you communicate well, and how to get your message across. I mean, in my experience, the one thing which is a tool that can be used to great effect is social media, especially if there's a legislative vehicle being considered and you're targeting a committee. You want to target that committee and use a Twitter, for example, effectively with hashtags, with handles, and you can create a communication that really stands out. I remember watching it during FAA reform, organizations really tailoring their message to what we were trying to do. And if they supported us, it really helped bolster our communications efforts. So there are ways that it's kind of like soft lobbying through communications. And that's a whole realm of kind of tools and tactics, which we hope to cover in that session. So again, 5 good sessions covering local, state, and federal lobbying, advocacy, and just how to build relationships. And that starts on the 2nd, March 2nd, and it runs the entire month. All the information can be found online. And you go to programs.acec.org/gov-engagement-2021. And of course, we'll have that in the show notes, so you can link to it and click there. And that's how you access it. The registration is open now. So Matt and Katharine, we are in a recess week. Anything to look ahead for next week? Anything going on or something of note to make sure our listeners are aware of?
Yeah, just one quick comment, and you mentioned at the top of the program about the infrastructure agenda coming on the heels of this most recent economic relief package. We expect the committees in the House and the Senate to start hearings on the infrastructure agenda on surface transportation reauthorization next week, both in the House and the Senate. So that agenda is going to pick up in earnest here, at the end of February and going into March. We expect the administration to roll out a broader blueprint for their Build Back Better campaign platform. So yeah, it's really going to be very timely. We expect to be very, very busy here in the spring with an infrastructure agenda moving through Congress.
Katharine, what's going on in your world?
I think in my world, it's 2 things. One is that the Congress, they've just put forward the immigration bill that President Biden outlined. So we've seen more details of that now. And then I think at some point, we'll clearly get back into tax policy, especially when Congress gets to a point where they're no longer comfortable with deficit spending and they want to feel a need to start paying for things, and or the new majorities in Congress want to sort of take a different look at what was done in 2017 in the tax law. Mm-hmm. So that's where I think we'll be looking, but probably further down the road.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for your time this afternoon. We will talk to you next week for our next update. And until then, everyone, stay warm and stay safe. This has been the Government Affairs Update for February 19th, 2021. We'll see you next time.